For many years, the mystery surrounding the world's largest lost treasure trove, the Manso fortune, has piqued the interest of millions of people all around the world. With links to the British siege of Havana, the mysterious activities on Oak Island, and the scuttling of a British ship, the London, with chests of treasure, French prisoners of war and slaves, in the Devon town of Ilfracombe. The lost fortune, at present-day value, valued at possibly over £15 billion, has been hunted by many. But is it now closer to being found? Now a team of data scientists from London, and a worldwide membership network, believe it is. With advances in natural language processing, data scientists are able to pull together massive data sets of ship movements, articles written in newspapers and journals, previous research in books, and look for patterns in the data that previously would be impossible to spot. Patterns of linked dates, people, relationships and movement of goods and money. The tale starts with Don Francisco Manso de Contreras, King Philip II of Spain's Chief Justice for the Indies. He arrived in Cuba to clean up smuggling in 1599. He settled in the town of Remedios on Cuba's north coast, and over the next 150 years the family became exceedingly rich. By 1704, the family had started to get increasingly concerned with world events, and the security of their fortune. They decided at least some of their wealth should be moved to a bank overseas for safety. At this time the London and Amsterdam banks had started issuing promissory notes, enabling wealth to be more easily transferable. Large amounts of gold, silver, and jewelry from the Manso fortune were sent in secret to Europe. It is known that large deposits were made at periods of uncertainty, such as the American War of Independence in 1776, and the French Revolution in 1789. But there was also a transfer in 1762, after the fall of Havana to the British. When Spain joined France in the 7 Years' War against the British reacted quickly, and sent a huge expedition under the leadership of Lord Albemarle. He laid siege and captured the city of Havana in Cuba. Havana, located over the Gulf Stream, the fastest route for ships sailing from America to Europe, was more populated than either Boston or New York, and held the heart of the Spanish fleet in the Caribbean, and was key to Spain's influence in the region. The speed of the British assembly of 21 ships of the line, 24 lesser ships, and 168 transports, with over 12,000 soldiers, was key, as when they arrived at Havana, the Spanish were completely unprepared and succumbed. On the evening of the 6th of September, 1762, a convoy of 30 transports from Havana arrived in New York. 4 transport ships, carrying British troops from the Royal Highlanders Regiment, continued onwards for Plymouth, via Halifax, commissioned to transport a deposit from the Manso family. The weather had turned and the seas stormy. The transports travelled closer to the east coast. As they reached Nova Scotia, the 4 transport ships split, with 2 taking refuge at Bridgewater, whilst the other 2 continued their journey towards Plymouth, escorted by His Majesty's ship, Aldborough, who had left Quebec on the 10th of September. They arrived in Plymouth on the 30th of October. The chests were unloaded and signed for by Francis Baring, a son of an Exeter wool trader. In 1762, a new bank, becoming the UK's oldest merchant bank, was founded by Francis and John Baring. Baring's bank went on to finance the United States government's purchase of Louisiana from Napoleon Bonaparte in 1803. This doubled the size of the United States. After a $3 million down payment in gold, the remainder of the purchase was made in United States bonds, which Napoleon sold to Barings through Hope and Company of Amsterdam. Barings had an illustrious client list, including the Russian royal family, Bonaparte's nephew, Napoleon III, as well as U.S. presidents, James Monroe, and Franklin Roosevelt. By 1818, Barings was called the 6th great European power, after Great Britain, France, Prussia, Austria, and Russia. Just off the lobby, at Dutch Bank ING's London office on Moorgate, is an unremarkable door. It is easy to miss, it looks identical to the surrounding wall panels, other than its handle. Behind it is another door, with a sign warning that the room ahead has a reduced oxygen supply, and that visitors must leave immediately if an alarm sounds. Inside lies the legacy of one of the world's oldest merchant banks. The clandestine Bearing Archive, a collection of centuries-old documents and materials, charts the story of the bank that started life the same year that the transports arrived from Cuba. The room has its oxygen and humidity controlled so that if a fire broke out it could not spread, and staff are told not to spend more than a few hours inside without taking a 30-minute break. Although economic historians and other researchers travel from around the world to work in the nearby reading room, where notes must be taken in pencil because of the risk of ink getting on documents, the archive has remained largely hidden. Meanwhile, one of the transports at Bridgewater, Nova Scotia, unloaded their cargo into the hands of a Master Robinson, or Robertson, the captain of a sloop called the Falmouth. The fate of the second transport is currently being researched. The hypothesis is that Robinson, who knew the islands surrounding Nova Scotia, was tasked with hiding the part of the Manso fortune that had been extracted from the main cargo, somewhere in the surrounding islands. With the help from a British mining engineer and Cornish tin mine adventurer, James Crompton, who was on secondment to the 2nd Battalion of the 58th Regiment of Foot, the treasure was successfully hidden in 1762 at Oak Island. James Crompton was a contemporary and friend of James Watt, the Scottish inventor of the steam engine, and appears later in our story. We would all like to find a treasure map, wouldn't we? But a map doesn't have to be a piece of paper. Through the centuries, maps have more often been told rather than drawn, and communicated through stories we can remember. Stories told around a campfire by a visiting stranger, or passed down through generations within the same family, or even in the folklore of the culture. Rather than a church spire, a gnarled tree on a hill, a sea monster, or an X marking the spot, a landmark on a treasure map may equally be an event in time, an article in a newspaper, a record in an archive, or a painting, painted centuries after the event. Paper maps only record a moment in time, but following a trail through data can record directions across centuries. The challenge following a trail of events and actions across time is partly the sheer volume of data you need to analyze, the multitude of different data formats, the different languages, and even if in the same language, the same event may be described very differently. Computers have been used for decades to process huge volumes of data, but it's only been since 2019, with advances in data science, that we have been able to teach computers to understand when two events described differently are actually the same. Imagine a computer reading two sentences. What is your age? And, how old are you? They are two sentences constructed very differently but actually mean the same thing. Before 2019, it would have been almost impossible for a computer to understand that they meant the same. Now we can not only process huge volumes of data, understand the sentiment of what is being said, and most importantly, spot patterns, links and relationships. The members of Reynard Fox create and test hypotheses in the tracking of historical mysteries, and is currently focused on the Manso fortune. The relationships in the data that the team uncover are creating a number of different hypotheses that are then investigated by our members to see what evidence exists to prove or disprove their authenticity. 4 different hypotheses are currently being reviewed, with our members adding information daily in the Caribbean, Cuba, the US, Nova Scotia and many European cities, looking for the data to fill the gaps in the story. It is like a novel, where the different chapters are written but distributed in different locations. The clues hidden in the data are enabling us to find them. There are a lot of theories and stories surrounding hidden treasure, potentially buried on Oak Island, in something called the Money Pit. There are books and TV series, and there have been numerous attempts over the years to try and tunnel down to find the lost treasure. Our hypothesis is that indeed the treasure was there, but that it was removed in 1796 and transported to England, and although a few trinkets may have been lost whilst the treasure was being removed from the Money Pit, the treasure has long gone. The Ilfracombe Port Book, at Kew in London, gives the following account for 10th of October 1796.
Last evening, the London of London, a transport, mastered by William Robinson from St. Kitts, with French prisoners aboard, was unfortunately driven on shore at the entrance of this harbour. Upwards of 40 persons were drowned. The vessel was entirely lost.
From the records at the Admiralty Office, October 22, 1796.
Pursuant to an Act of Parliament, passed in the 26th year of the reign of His late Majesty, this is to give notice to the concerned, that information has been sent to this office that the transport ship London, of London, whereof William Robinson was master, bound from the island of St. Christopher's to Plymouth, was on the 9th instant, in tempestuous weather, unfortunately wrecked at the entrance of the harbour of Ilfracombe in the county of Devon.
Rewind 3 years. Fresh from the turmoil of her revolution, France declared war on Great Britain once again. While Britain relied on her powerful navy, France resorted to what was known as levy en masse, effectively mass conscription, to swell the ranks of her army. This remained the case even in her faraway colonies in the West Indies. The French released many slave labourers to fight against the British, often with free-born black officers leading them. On islands, such as St. Lucia, St. Vincent, Martinique, and Grenada, they fought against the British. Some islands exchanged hands several times over the course of the conflict. The slaves turned soldiers were ultimately viewed as prisoners of war by the British, and were loaded onto large troop transport ships, to be taken across the Atlantic in convoys and into prisoner-of-war camps in Britain. One such convoy, led by HMS Ganges, left St. Kitts in July 1796. With 3,000 prisoners captured on the islands of St. Lucia, St. Vincent, and Grenada. Official records show the London carrying 1 officer, 8 sergeants, and 11 privates of the 66th Regiment, and 106 French prisoners, black. Gathering the convoy together had taken weeks. With poor weather blowing in, 4 of the transports left Bastère Bay before the whole convoy was assembled. Traveling in a convoy enabled all the ships to travel unharassed, so there must have been strong reasons for the transport ships to leave early. Following the trade routes for slaves, sugar and molasses, they headed north, up the coast of the newly named United States, but with a very different trade in mind. The gods were kind and the trade winds pushed them ahead in urgent time, whilst HMS Ganges, and the rest of the convoy, was still trapped in safe harbour under the protection of Bastère Bay. The 4 ships, with the labour and engineering skills to haul the hidden treasure out from the money pit, had 4 weeks to onboard the chests, collapse the pit, resupply and then rejoin the convoy as it reached the auspices of Nova Scotia. The Ganges convoy reached Ireland before splitting in 2, with one group heading for a large prisoner-of-war camp at Liverpool while the other sailed towards Plymouth. The 4 transports carrying the Manso treasure, however, hung back, and then broke away, making a sharp dash up the Bristol Channel towards Ilfracombe on the North Devon coast. As they turned the southern tip of Ireland, the storms that had been battling the convoy got severely worse as they headed up the Bristol Channel. One of the ships, the New Adventure, under Captain James Ingate, made better progress and arrived the evening before the London, and safely docked and unloaded before the other 3 arrived. Something in the plan, however, had gone wrong. Although the pilot boats were happy to lead the London into the harbour, Robinson, the captain of the London, refused and said he would tie up on a buoy outside the harbour breakwater, which was disastrous. Whether he had received a signal from James Ingate of the New Adventure from shore, or even not received the signal he was expecting, he decided he would not go into harbour but tie up, hoping the storm would ease and he could make a break for open water. According to a later account by a Captain Chiswell, the pilots, who help guide ships into difficult ports, rowed out to meet the bark, looking to guide her into Ilfracombe harbour. They hollered over the rising wind. "Where are you from?" "From hell, bound for damnation," Robinson roared back, before dismissing their offers of help. He tried to turn the ship on the buoy, but his ambitious maneuver failed, and the ship, with its prisoners chained in the hold, was dashed against the rocks at Rapparee Cove. Captain Chiswell's account, held in the Ilfracombe Museum, was that the ship contained 5 treasure chests, only 4 of which were recovered. He described the cove as covered with the bodies of Negroes, and recorded that the corpse of a young woman, a naked lily fair, was also washed up. Spanish coin and bones, to this day, are still often found in Rapparee Cove. However, there are some holes in the account by Captain Chiswell, who was in charge of the pilot boat that went out to meet the London. In his account, admittedly written from memory after the event, he said,
"The valuables on board were contained in 5 chests. There was specky, Spanish dollars and doubloons. One of the chests was lost during the transfer from the ship, and was no doubt broken up at the bottom of the sea."
This would mean that there was time for the 5 chests to be transferred from the ship before it was wrecked on the rocks. Successfully winching 5 chests from a ship, violently breaking up on the rocks, would be impossible. Even winching the chests from the London, moored on the buoy in rough seas, to another vessel, or a pilot boat would have been a very desperate attempt, but it's clear from Chiswell's testimony a transfer of the treasure was planned and executed, regardless of whether the ship was to be taken into harbour or not. And this is where the story really begins. The treasure from the new adventure, what happened to that? And what was the fate of the other 2 ships carrying the treasure? The London Jamaica wine house in St. Michael's Alley continually pops up throughout history in relation to the Manso fortune, but why? Where does the money trail lead that was potentially invested into Barings Bank in London, that notoriously went bust? And James Crompton, where was he between depositing the Manso treasure at Oak Island in 1762, to ending up being buried in Ilfracombe the same week that the London sank? Every day, more and more gaps in the story are being filled by the members of Reynard Fox, but equally new datasets suggest new patterns to explore. Another name, Spencer Williams, also appears in records in London, Amsterdam, and Florida, often with some association to Gracia Real de Santa Teresa de Mos, an early free community of ex-slaves. These are just some of the areas the members of Reynard Fox are exploring, sharing what they have found, all looking to crack this historical mystery, and just perhaps, moving us a few steps closer to finding the lost fortune. If you would like to find out more, or would like to join Reynard Fox as a member, with access to the research from the whole community, then please visit their website at reynard-fox.com.